Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Good to have all of you, and welcome to my wonderful student, Rabbi Rebecca Orontes. I'm sorry. So let's start with the blessing for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage in the words of Torah. Okay, now what I'd like to do is I want to share with you, I got to find the right screen here because it's very complicated. Okay, yeah, that's what I want to share with you. I want to share with you a map of ancient Israel because we're talking about all these different countries that have been involved with each other and waging war, and I want you to get a sense of where they were. So I'm going to share, here we go. Here's the map. So as you can see, you have the Assyrian Empire up here, which is eventually going to take over the northern kingdom. And you have the Aramaean tribes right now. These are the ones attacking Israel. You see you have the kingdom of Israel here in blue, northern kingdom. The kingdom of Judah down here in pink, which is pretty small. Edom down here, which you hear a lot about, precursors of all the nasty people like Rome. Philistine are over here. This is pretty much where the Gaza Strip is now. And it really was never part of Israel, as you can see right here. This is the Philistines who are going to be waging war. I mean, they waged war against Saul and David, and they're always a thorn in the side of Israel. Moab, Ammon, Aram. So that just gives you that idea. And I also just want to bring us up to date. So we're going to begin with 2 Kings chapter 6. And what's been going on is that despite the fact that the Bible really does not like Ahab or his father Omri or Ahab's son Jeroboam, the fact is it was a long-lasting dynasty, Omri, Ahab, and then the son. So they were actually pretty successful politically and economically. However, of course, because of Jezebel, the Ahab's wife, they were, drifting to worshiping Baal. And that's something that's a big no-no. So they are condemned in the Bible because, again, remember, this history is written by Judah, the last man standing, the tribe of Judah, the kingdom of Judah. So they're very critical of the northern kingdom. Because remember, the northern kingdom started with Jeroboam going up north and building alternative temples with golden calves. Remember that? So they're very, very, very criticized. But as I said, the Omri dynasty is pretty stable. It's now going to be destabilized. And you're going to see that Elisha, the prophet, is going to be intervening in politics in a way that other prophets had not done and will not do. But we'll find out very soon. Okay, now I just need to fix something here on the biblical material. I know what that is. Okay, let me get rid of this. Okay, so before we start, I just want to see if there are any questions. Anybody have questions, comments? No. Okay, Mickey, you're muted.
My question is, in all these battles that we've seen here, especially this last battle where they, destroyed everything, the trees and everything, but it doesn't say anything about them taking the land, and we don't see that very often in any detail, description of what's gone on. What is the reason why they kill all these people, but they don't take the land? And I was just curious about that.
That is an excellent question. I don't know if I can answer it. Yeah, I don't know. It's possible that they do take the land, but then they continue battling and whatever. These wars seem to be pretty constant. As soon as one guy's defeated, his successor comes along and, there's another war. So I really don't know the answer to that question. It may not. Yeah, Christine, maybe Christine does.
Well, I don't pretend to know the answer, but one of the things that has happened in other places in early state formation is that if you kill the people, there's nobody to work the land, and the point is taxes and things that you can give for the state, and so it doesn't really. Then it's just like land that needs administering with a depleted population, and it doesn't make sense. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know in this case.
I have a suggestion.
Go ahead, Jane.
Okay.
Why they don't take the land, which is also, part of what Christine is saying. I think first of all, they don't have enough manpower to take the land. They cannot leave a contingent of soldiers and then move on and do another battle, because if they are successful, they're going to deplete their army. So I think that what they do is they make these areas into vassal states, in a sense, which is what Christine was talking about, which is that you work through a local administrator, and that administrator is responsible for the taxes and the corvée and, everything that comes out of the central power. It's the only way to efficiently exercise power when you're on the move. And if you want a modern example of it, the best modern example was India under British rule. They worked through the local Rajas, etc., because to rule India, I mean, you need an enormous task force of administrators and military in order to do that.
Jane, that's great. Okay, I will try to see if I can find any other answers, but thank you for that question.
I was just wondering if maybe the counts of this destroying everything are somewhat exaggerated.
Oh,
Because
Yeah.
if they really want them to pay taxes and all that stuff, you don't destroy it all.
yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
point. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I do think that this is definitely exaggerated, but I think what you've all said makes a lot of sense. And then again, remember that as soon as they win a victory, there's another attack, so it's not like they can hang on to it all that long. And these are small kingdoms fighting with each other, as opposed to, for example, the Assyrian Empire that is going to take over and completely wipe out the Northern Kingdom, right? In 722 BCE. So, if it's an empire, then they're able to really take it over, and then forget being a vassal state. You're nothing. All right, so let's who wants to read? We're going to start with chapter 6.
I can do it for.
Okay. Sandy, all right, we'll start with Sandy.
Until my voice goes out.
All right, when your voice goes out, we'll have Christine and Jane, right?
Right.
Okay. Here we go. Let's see, chapter 6. Here we are. Okay, wait a minute. Let me
Move it up a little bit.
I'm gonna wait. You know what? I'm stopping sharing a minute because there's something in the way here I do not like. Okay. Move this up, and now we're going to share the screen again. All right. Let's see. We're going to go down this way, and an axe head float. So remember that these strange little titles like this are put in by the Christians. This is not even the chapter and verse numbers are not even from us. But I like this translation, which is why we use it. Okay. Please begin.
The company of the prophets said to Elijah, look, Elisha, look, the place where we meet with you is too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan, where each of us can get a pole, and let us build a place there for us to meet. And he said, go. Then one of them said, won't you please come with your servants? I will, Elisha replied, and he went with them. They went to the Jordan and began to cut down trees. As one of them was cutting down a tree, the iron axe head fell into the water. Oh no, my lord, he cried out. It was borrowed. The man of God asked, where did it fall? When he showed him the place, Elisha cut a stick and threw it there and made the iron float. Lift it out, he said. Then the man reached out his hand and took it.
Okay, so let's just stop for 1 second. So what's this business about the axe head?
They borrowed it so they can't lose it.
Yeah, and why particularly an axe head?
Iron is very precious.
Exactly. It's a very expensive item. And obviously these people are very poor. We read last time that they were so hungry they went and gathered some stuff from the field and they almost poisoned themselves until Elisha threw some flour in the soup, which somehow neutralized the poison. So yeah, it's you know, Jane, I'm going to mute you just in case it's your dog that's barking. So yeah, so it's an expensive piece of equipment, and you don't want to lose it. And then of course Elisha, being this miracle worker, again, like I mentioned last time, that these miracle acts are what inspires the stories about Jesus. So the axe head is falling into the water and is going to sink to the bottom, but he throws a stick and makes it float. So it's a little miracle there. Save it. Okay. Now here we are again. Go ahead.
Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such and such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king so that he was on guard in such places. Now let somebody else read.
Jane, go ahead, Jane.
This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, tell me, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel? None of us, my lord the king, said one of the officers, but Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Go find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back. He is in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. I have a question, Rabbi. This
Yes.
Dothan, is this the same place where the Joseph was looking for his brothers?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Let me look it up. I don't know.
And this is where he meets the man, and he said, oh, they went on to Dothan and that's where they put him in the pit. Isn't that this? Because I'm studying Joseph in another class, and I just thought the name was the same.
I just realized that there is a Dothan in Alabama, which is where someone told me I should apply for a job. Okay. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That is very, very good. I don't know if there's any kind of resonance, that it's a place that's dangerous on some level because of that resonance. That's possible.
Mm-hmm.
But that's great to notice that.
Yeah. Oh, and it's interesting, just aside it, and I'll go on. But in this class, if you don't have that man telling Joseph where to go, the whole story falls apart.
Oh, absolutely.
It's one of those hinges of history,
Well, if you were a believing person, you'd say God sent him there.
Right. Oh, we had a big discussion about whether the word ish means angel.
Oh, yeah. When Jacob's wrestling in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Well, it's translated very often as angel because what does it mean? It's a man. Well, figure it out. That's the whole point of the story. Okay.
Okay. So let's leave Joseph. Okay. So when the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh no, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed, open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. As the enemy came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike this army with blindness. So he struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. Elisha told them, this is not the road and this is not the city. Follow me and I will lead you to the man you're looking for. And he led them to Samaria. After they entered the city, Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men so that they can see. Then the Lord opened their eyes and they looked and they were inside Samaria.
So I just want to point out, first of all, there's a problem with the translation here, unfortunately. They're not just struck with blindness. They're struck with blindness with light. I mean, I'm going to read you.
Thank you.
I'm going to read you Alter's translation. So, and Elisha prayed and said, Lord, open his eyes, pray that he may see. And the Lord opened the lad's eyes and saw, and look, the mountain was filled with horses and chariots of fire around Elisha. And they came down to him. And Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, strike this nation with blinding light. And he struck them with blinding light, according to the word of Elisha. Now, why is that important? Because if you want some resonance, let me pull up another text. Okay, here we go. And I'm going to share this with you. This is Genesis 19. And this is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember, the men of Sodom want to rape Lot and any other, of his males that are with him. And of course, Lot, in a very, dashingly gentlemanly way, says, no, take my daughters instead and do whatever you want with them. Anyhow, so, right. And so then here, the people who are inside the inn, who are decent people, who happen to be angels, the men inside reached out and pulled Lot back into the house and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness, so they could not find the door. Now, again, this is a translation from the, oh, oopsie, no, I do not want to log in. So again, the translation is not as nice as it should be, because it's, again, they were struck blind with light.
Right.
And I don't know why they don't translate it that way. I guess it sounds contradictory. Well, that's exactly the whole. Yes. Yeah. I mean, Christine.
It's not the first time, and The Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings also plays on this a bit, but the key thing here is that it's early in the day. It's dawn. And if the armies are on the hills and they seem to be surrounded by fire, that's the sun coming up, and it is blinding for the people
Right.
looking up.
Absolutely. Well, it's like that, remember when the, I think it was the Aramaeans were looking at the water that was red, and it was red because of the reflection of the mountains around there.
Exactly.
But yeah, but I mean, I don't know why they left out the light in the blindness. I'll get to you one second, Jane. Just because, striking with blindness is one thing. Striking with blindness from the light, from, whatever is around there, the chariots of fire, the sun, the whatever. I mean, it's much more evocative than to just say they were struck with blindness. So I don't know why they didn't translate it that way, but thank God we have Robert Alter to give us a better translation. And too bad that's not available online, because what Robert Alter does is he does very close to the original translation.
Well, isn't this a Christian translation?
It is, but if you look at JPS, which is a Jewish translation, and apparently later they got a little more literal, but when they translate the Torah, for example, when the Israelites are at the mountain, at Mount Sinai, and they say, we will do and we will hear, or we will do and we will understand. I mean, sort of in the opposite order. Right? First you do, then you get it, as opposed to you get it, then you do. Obviously, there's a lot of interpretation you can give to that. So what JPS does with it, because it's like, this doesn't make any sense, they translate it as, we will faithfully do. Okay, I guess that's one way to understand what they're saying. Like, we're going to do what you tell us to do, whether we get it or not. But it doesn't allow you to understand the original, which then opens you up to all kinds of interpretive moves. The same thing is when the Israelites are standing at Mount Sinai and it says that God held the mountain. Well, it says they were standing tachtav, which means under the mountain. Okay. Which all, of course, is an expression that can mean at the foot of the mountain. So of course it's translated as at the foot of the mountain by JPS. But since it says tachtav, which means underneath it, that opens it up to interpretation. So you cannot even understand the Midrash unless you understand the Hebrew. So the Midrash says God was holding the mountain over their heads and said, if you accept my Torah, all will be well. If not, I'm going to drop the mountain on your heads. And that's the sort of more awesome way of translating it. A sweeter way is that the mountain served as a chuppah. And it was, and the Torah served as the ketubah, and it was Israel and God getting married. But how do they even come up with those interpretations if you don't know that there's this one word that can mean over, or that they're under something that's held over them? So that's the problem with translation, obviously, is it's always interpretation on some level. The more traditional translations from the Jewish perspective will take into consideration Rashi, for example. Like Rashi will take in all this Midrash and then you'll translate it based on that. So there's no way to be completely true to the original. The first person who tried to do that was Everett Fox, who translated it from the German, because Franz Rosenzweig translated the Bible from Hebrew to German and as close to the original as possible. And then Everett Fox took that, but it's very clunky. Because he also, not only did he translate the words as close as possible to the original, but he also translated the rhythm of the language as close as possible. And of course, Hebrew and English have completely different rhythms. So it's very, very clunky. There's also the infinitive absolute in Hebrew. So, it's like you have the infinitive and then you have the conjugated verb. So, you could say he really died or he died dying or whatever, so Fox does it that way. And again, it's very hard to read. And I would never recommend that translation to someone who's just getting started. So JPS is more elegant, but Everett Fox is more, literal. And then I think Robert Alter does a very good job. At least that's not my opinion, it's other people's opinion because I'm not an expert, but I think he does a nice job of sticking as close as possible to the original with a lot of notes. And a lot of the notes are about translation, not so much about interpretation. Okay, any other questions or comments before we see what happens? Oh, the other thing I wanted to point out is that Elijah, when he was in trouble, had to flee on his own. But here you have this miraculous chariots of fires that appear to save him. So he's a very different kind of prophet. It's interesting, last time we were talking about how Elisha was so obtuse when it came to this woman that he was trying to help, right? He never spoke to her directly. He always spoke through a servant. He never mentioned her name. And I was just kind of looking a little bit on the internet to see if there were any negative portrayals of Elisha. No, there weren't. So I'm sure there's some feminist who's written about this somewhere. I'd have to really dig it up because he's very rude to her. But one of the great prophets. So how bad can he be, right? All right, so we're gonna continue, and we'll pick it up at verse 21. Okay, Jane, you want to keep going?
Okay, sure. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, "Shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them?" "Do not kill them," he answered. "Would you kill those you have captured with your own sword and bow? Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink and then go back to their master." So he prepared a great feast for them, and after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory.
Okay, so just
smart move.
Yes. So, okay, apparently what Elisha is saying is, look, these people were captured through some miracle. They're not legitimate prisoners of war. So don't kill them. give them some water and whatever. And of course, the king goes one better and gives them a great feast. And that's going to be interesting to keep in mind with what comes next, because as you see, a famine is coming.
Okay. Sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mobilized his entire army and marched up and laid siege to Samaria.
So you see, it never stops. Like, one wins over the other one, fights back. I mean, it's this constant war.
There was a great famine in the city. Siege lasted so long, that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver and a quarter of a cob of seed pods for 5 shekels.
All right. So let me just say that obviously these are, a donkey head is the inedible part of a donkey. And pigeon droppings is what they're talking about here, even though it says seed pods or whatever, right? I mean, it's the droppings of the pigeons. So this is clearly a moment of great desperation, right? I mean, if this is what you're forced to eat, and it gets worse, which is, by the way, in Deuteronomy, you remember the curses about what's going to happen to you. You're going to be, your enemy is going to lay siege to you. You're going to end up eating your afterbirth and your children and all that stuff. So yeah, just keep that in mind here, because of course these Israelites are not people that have been faithful to God.
As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried to him, "Help me, my lord the king." The king replied, "If the Lord does not help you, where can I get help for you? From the threshing floor, from the wine press?" Then he asked her, "What's the matter?"
Okay, let me just stop you 1 second, because when he says from the threshing floor, from the wine press, he thinks she's saying, "Help me because I'm hungry." Okay, this is not what she's going to be saying to him. He's assuming she's saying, "I'm hungry." And he says, "Well, there's no food anywhere. Where do you want me to go to get you food?" That's his answer to her. Another obtuse king, shall we say. Or
She answered, this woman said to me, "Give up your son so we may eat him today, and tomorrow we'll eat my son." So we cooked my son and ate him. Right. The next day I said to her, "Give up your son so we may eat him," but she had hidden him.
Okay, now let's just stop for 1 second. Does this remind you of anything? Another king with two.
Solomon.
Exactly. Solomon, right? Where the two prostitutes come to him and say, this one baby, and both of them say it's mine, right? The other one got crushed by the mother by mistake. And, Solomon is very smart, right? And he says, okay, it belongs, I'm going to cut the baby in half. And the real mother is the one who says, no, give the baby to the other lady. So then he knows that's the real mother. You can't really do the same thing here, but in some ways, I think it's an echo of Solomon, but in a way that does not make the king look so wise or great, because there's nothing you can really do at this point, right?
When the king heard the woman's words, he tore his robes. As he went along the wall, the people looked, and they saw that under his robes he had sackcloth on his body. He said, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if the head of Elisha, son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today." Now Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. The king sent a messenger ahead, but before he arrived, Elisha said to the elders, "Don't you see how this murderer is sending someone to cut off my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold it shut against him. Is not the sound of his master's footsteps behind him?" While he was still talking to them, the messenger came down to him.
So wait a minute. Why do you think the king wants Elisha's head at this point?
Because he thinks it might make a difference in what's happening with the people starving.
Okay, that could be one reason. Any other thoughts? So according to Alter, again, this is all open to interpretation. It's certainly possible. Remember last time, in order to win a battle, somebody, sacrificed their son to appease. It wasn't to appease Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, it was to appease another god. But nonetheless, apparently it worked. So that is certainly possible, Lori. That the reason is, maybe if we get rid of this dumb prophet, we'll do better. But I think also, he's thinking, look, this guy Elisha was able to blind and take over this army of Arameans, by his miraculous powers. And the fact that he's not doing anything to intervene here when all these people are starving and people are eating their children, it must be that he's doing this on purpose. He's doing this to trap us or something. There's always a suspicion. We've seen that, in other stories here, the suspicion that somebody's, even when they're offering something that seems good, that it's actually a trap. So he now thinks Elisha, off with his head, right? And then last line here.
The king said, "This disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?"
So if this is happening because of the God of Israel, then, let's get rid of his prophet. That'll certainly, stop them. Right? Okay. Any questions or comments or thoughts?
I have a question.
Yes, Susie.
Who in the world wrote all this?
You know what?
Yeah.
There were a bunch of priests who wrote the story of what was going on, and it's odd. Yeah. Well, one thing you can see here is life was pretty violent, and it still is. It's just like in our country, it's done in a more sophisticated way. We don't chop people's heads off necessarily, although we do beat Black men to death. Okay. Latest thing that happened in Alabama or Memphis. Our society is still pretty violent, but often it's in a less latent way, right?
Right.
Isn't it violent to have all these people living on the streets when we are such a wealthy nation with so many billionaires? Come on,
I don't understand. I will never understand that.
It's
Right.
disgusting.
Yeah. So it's violence of a different kind. And there's financial violence, and there's there's wage theft, and there are wars, as we can see, right? Look what's going on in Russia. Russia and Ukraine. That war is, there's no reason for that war except for some nuts ego, really, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so it's written by human beings about human beings, which is, as we have noted, has not changed as much as we would have liked, right? Okay, so let's go on to see the next bloody chapter. All right.
Okay.
Christine,
You
you
want
want to read?
me? You
Yeah,
want
go
me to
ahead.
do this?
Yeah.
Okay. Elisha replied, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord said. About this time tomorrow, a seah of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria."
Okay, so what does that mean?
The famine's going to be over.
Because look how cheap this is compared to
Yeah.
how expensive. Let's see what it was for the donkey's head.
Yeah.
It
70
says a
shekels.
donkey's head, 80 pieces of silver. At least that's how Alter translates it, and a quarter of a ka of pigeon droppings for 5 pieces of silver. So you have this inflation like we've noticed right in our country right now. All the prices of home heating, for example, going to the point of absurdity. So it's going to.
The last time I bought pigeon droppings, I was very shocked.
Yeah, they've hiked up those pigeon dropping prices, haven't they? So, so things are going to get back to normal very soon. Okay.
The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen? You will see it with your own eyes," said Elisha, "but you will not eat any of it."
Ooh. By the way, we noticed this last time too, that the king always has some guy that he has to lean on.
He's the shill, yeah.
Yeah. I guess they didn't use canes in those days. Okay.
Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, "Why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we will live. If they kill us, then we die.
Yeah, hang on just one second. Okay, again,
Yeah.
the translation threw me for a second. Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm verse 2. Even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heaven. So this is really a parallel or an echo of anything come to mind? The floodgates of heaven, the fountains of heaven is the way Alter translates it.
Well, it's like the parting of the Red Sea and,
Well, it's a miracle of that ilk, but
Yeah.
this is like what God says to Noah
oh,
about the
okay.
flood. And
Okay.
it's the fountains of heaven. I don't know what the Hebrew is, but anyway, so obviously God can do that, right? Because he did. So here, this, officer says, God can't even do that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he'll do it, but it's probably unlikely, right? It's a sort of sarcastic reference to what God actually has already done. Like, oh yeah, he's going to end the famine. He's going to open, the fountains of the heavens, and yeah, sure, right? He's doubting it. Now, then you've got these 4 men with leprosy. Maybe it's that white scaly stuff that we can't translate. That
I think it's plaque psoriasis myself, but
yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And they figure either way they go, they're probably going to die. So they might as well go to the Arameans, and maybe they'll let us have some food. Maybe they'll spare us, and if not, they'll kill us. But if we go into the city, we'll die just as well. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Okay.
these guys really remind me of somebody I used to work with.
Oh. Uh-oh.
Well, we're gonna die anyway, so we may as well try this.
Yeah, exactly.
At dusk,
Okay.
they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there, for the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled into the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. The men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp, entered one of the tents, and ate and drank. Then they took silver, gold, and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent, and took some things from it and hid them also. Then they said to each other, "What we are doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace." So they went and called out to the city gatekeepers and told them, "We went into the Aramean camp and no one was there, not a sound of anyone, only tethered horses and donkeys, and the tents left just as they were." The gatekeepers shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace.
So here, this is like the sort of ultimate defeat of the Arameans. Not only did they flee in the middle of the night when it was dark, kind of like cowards, and but on top of that, the people reporting their defeat are these, outcasts from society. So that's kind of as low as I guess it gets.
The king got up in the night and said to his officers, "I will tell you what the Arameans have done to us. They know we are starving, so they have left the camp to hide in the countryside, thinking they will surely come out, and then we will take them alive and get into the city."
So once again, see, these guys are so paranoid that, the Arameans fled because they're scared.
Yeah.
But the king says, this is a trap, another trap, right? They're going to just pounce on us as soon as we think the coast is clear.
It really sounds like Trump. One of his officers answered, "Have some men take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. Their plight will be like that of all the Israelites left here. Yes, they will only be like all these Israelites who are doomed. So let us send them to find out what happened." So they selected 2 chariots with their horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army. He commanded the drivers, "Go and find out what has happened." They followed them as far as the Jordan, and they found the whole road strewn with the clothing and equipment of the Arameans had thrown away in their headlong flight. So the messengers returned and reported to the king. Then the people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans. So a seah of the finest flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, as the Lord had said.
So it, it came true, of course, the prediction came true. And there's so much plundering. I mean, killing and plundering and over and over again, right? Let me just stop for 1 sec. Is anybody watching Yellowstone by any chance?
Yeah, right.
Okay, well,
Wondering.
have you seen it, Christine?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's kind of a soap opera, but it's really interesting. It's about the West, it's about Montana in this particular case. And so there's a guy who's got a huge ranch, like way more land than anybody should have. And then you've got the Native Americans in the reservation next door who used to be on all this land. And then you've got the developers coming in to try to, develop condominiums and hotels and ski resorts.
Sarah, I'm in a Zoom meeting. Sorry. Okay.
So, it's just like the 3 forces, constantly fighting with each other, trying to take over the land. And it is so bloody. I mean, every time, and I'm sorry, it's the men, but every time the men have an argument, they start punching each other out. It's unbelievable, just punch, 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 blood and everything. And, it's total frontier justice, let's just kill off all the guys who are going to attack us. Let's just kill them in the middle of the night, bury them on the reservation because no one's going to check it out. It's just like this. And that, this is not like a documentary about the West, but I imagine that it's got some resonance with reality. And this is how our country was founded. And the land grabs and the building of, expensive housing to the detriment of affordable housing continues, just like in that show. But if you don't want to get hooked on something, it's 5 seasons, don't start watching it. And I don't like all that violence, to tell you the truth, but there you go. Once you get into it, you can't stop. And there are 4 prequels to it as well. Okay. So,
I've managed to skip those. Okay.
yeah. Okay. All right. We're down. Oh, here we are.
All right. Now, wait.
Now the king, 17.
There we go. Now the king had put the officer on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate, and the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died, just as the man of God had foretold when the king came down to his house. It happened as the man of God had said to the king. About this time tomorrow, a seah of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gates of Samaria. The officer had said to the man of the God, "Look, even the Lord should open up the floodgates of heaven. Could this happen?" The man of God had replied, "You will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it." And that is exactly what happened to him, for the people trampled him in the gateway and he died.
As we know, trampling still happens, right?
Yeah.
In various
really.
places. But yeah, so this guy was so arrogant, God can't do this or that or whatever. And Elisha says, yeah, you'll see. And he won't live to see much of it though.
Yeah.
So he gets trampled. So Elisha's predictions come true.
Yeah.
Okay, before we go on to the next chapter, any thoughts, comments, questions? Do we learn anything from history? No. Okay. Unfortunately, I wish we did. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the next chapter. Okay, now remember the Shunammite lady. And by the way, the best is going to be for last because we have not seen the end of Jezebel yet, but we will get there, I believe, today. Yes, we will get there very soon. Okay, so remember the Shunammite was a woman whose son was very sick and Elisha revived him. And she was very poor, and he kind of multiplied her oil to the point where she was able to make some money. And but he never really spoke to her directly. And who would like to read this?
I will, Rabbi.
Okay, thank you, Lori.
Now Elisha had said to the woman whose son he restored to life, "Go away with your family and stay for a while wherever you can, because the Lord has decreed a famine in the land that will last 7 years." The woman proceeded to do this as the man of God said. She and her family went away and stayed in the land of the Philistines 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, she came back from the land of the Philistines and went to appeal to the king for her house and land. The king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and had said, "Tell me about all the great things Elisha has done." Just as Gehazi was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead to life, the woman whose son Elisha had brought back to life came to appeal to the king for her house and land. Gehazi said, "This is the woman, my lord king, and this is her son whom Elisha restored to life." The king asked the woman about it, and she told him. Then he assigned her an official to her case and said to him, "Give back everything that belonged to her, including all the income from her land from the day she left the country until now."
Okay, so remember Gehazi? Remember he was struck with, quote, leprosy last time around. But here, he doesn't seem to be struck with it. So the conclusion to that is that this, as we said last time, we have a collection of stories about Elisha, these, miracle stories, but they're not told in any clear, sequential order. The timeline is kind of fuzzy because last time this guy had leprosy, this time he doesn't. So, who knows which, and often the king is not named. And so you're not really sure which king or what time period. And that's very secondary to the story. The main thing is Elisha being a miracle worker. And of course, all these wars between Israel and, the Arameans. Okay. And yeah. All right, keep going, please.
Elisha went to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, was ill. When the king was told, "The man of God has come all the way up here," he said to Hazael, "Take a gift with you and go to meet the man of God. Consult the Lord through him. Ask him, will I recover from this illness?" Hazael went to meet Elisha, taking him as a gift 40 camel loads of all the finest wares of Damascus.
That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it is a lot of stuff. He went in and stood before him and said, "Your son Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, has sent me to ask, will I recover from this illness?" Elisha answered, "Go and say to him, you will certainly recover. Nevertheless, the Lord has revealed to me that he will in fact die." He stared at him with a fixed gaze until Hazael was embarrassed. Then the man of God began to weep.
Okay, let's stop just 1 second. So he will recover from the illness. However, he will die. Of course, we're all going to die, but I don't think he means die in a natural way. And staring at him, maybe he knows something, right? Because Hazael is the servant to the king, but maybe he's getting a hint here about the king dying. And it's interesting that, this is the king from Aram, but they're consulting with Elisha, who's the prophet of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, which is not the God that they believe in, but they clearly see that, that God has a lot of power. And so perhaps they know what the fate of the king is going to be. So now the guy's weeping. Elisha's weeping. So go ahead.
"Why is my Lord weeping?" asked Hazael. "Because I know the harm you will do to the Israelites," he answered. "You will set fire to their fortified places, kill their young men with the sword, dash their little children to the ground, and rip open their pregnant women." Hazael said, "How could you, your servant, a mere dog, accomplish such a feat? The Lord has shown me that you will become king of Aram," answered Elisha. Then Hazael left Elisha and returned to his master. When Ben-Hadad asked, "What did Elisha say?" Hazael replied, "He told me that you would certainly recover. But the next day he took a thick cloth, soaked it in water, and spread it over the king's face so that he died. Then Hazael succeeded him as king.
Okay, so, here we have palace intrigue. This is like Shakespeare, right? So the Elisha kind of hints at, well, you're going to become a king. Now, maybe that gives this guy an idea. I guess if I kill the king, I can become king myself. It certainly didn't happen in a very natural way, as though God had ordained it, right? Because he takes matters into his own hand and kills the guy himself. And of course, he, professes to be humble, in verse 13. How could your servant, a mere dog, accomplish such a feat, right? Me? I'm going to be a king and I'm going to do all these awful things? I don't think so. And it didn't take him long to get onto that road, right? It's interesting that, okay, so in the next section, it says in the 5th year of Joram. So Joram sometimes is called Jehoram. Two ways of saying that same name. So very confusingly, it's the same name for the king in the north and the king in the south. But Jehoram or Joram is the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. He's Ahab's son. Again, Ahab being the son of Omri. So Omri ruled, then Ahab, now the son. So it's a long dynasty. I think it's about like 100 years. And it's a longer dynasty than, really almost any other king. So as I said, that they were successful politically and economically. The problem is that they, were not faithful to God. And so they get criticized for that. Anyhow, so we're going to see what happens to these guys. Okay, please keep going.
In the 5th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, when Jehoshaphat was king of Judah, Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, began his reign as king of Judah. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel, as the house of Ahab had done, for he married a daughter of Ahab. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Nevertheless, for the sake of his servant David, the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah. He had promised to maintain a lamp for David and his descendants forever.
Okay, so, here you have the guy from Judah marrying a daughter of Ahab. And of course, that must mean that this daughter led him astray, just the way Jezebel led Ahab astray. But, God made this everlasting covenant. Let me just stop one sec. So the covenant that we have with God from Mount Sinai is a what's it called? Conditional covenant, right? God says if you do well and you follow my commandments, you'll prosper. If not, you're going to be punished very severely. You might even be kicked out of the land. The covenant with David is a different covenant, and it's an eternal covenant. It is not conditional. And the covenant is such that it says a descendant of King David will be on the throne forever. Interestingly enough, that didn't really happen. Okay. I mean, eventually we were completely taken over by another power. So, but here they're still talking as though, because they don't know this is going to happen, that, God is going to protect Judah because of the covenant that was made with King David. Okay, so let's see. Okay, here we go. Verse 20.
Have someone else read now, please.
Of course. Who would like to read?
I will.
Okay,
I was
Sherry.
muted.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry.
I was muted. In the time of Jehoram, Edom rebelled against Judah and set up its own king. So Jehoram went to Zaire with all his chariots. The Edomites surrounded him and his chariot commanders, but he rose up and broke through by night. His army, however, fled back home. To this day, Edom has been in rebellion against Judah. Libnah revolted at the same time. Wait, who's Libnah?
Some other little fiefdom.
Ah, okay. thought it was a person. As for other events of Jehoram's reign and all he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? Jehoram rested with his ancestors and was buried with him in the city of David. And Azariah, his son, succeeded him as king.
I'm just looking for 1 second here. Hang on, I just want to see if. Yeah, I was just looking to see if there was a note about that name, but there isn't. Okay. So as you see, these little kingdoms that are, they're all little tiny kingdoms, and they're constantly fighting against each other. Now, Edom been in rebellion against Judah, maybe from a vassal state, it's rebelling, so they're just constantly fighting. But now we're going to get to the juicy stuff.
In the 12th year of Joram, son of Ahab, king of Israel, Hazael, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, began to reign. Isaiah was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 1 year. His mother's name was Athaliah, a granddaughter of Omri, king of Israel. He followed the ways of the house of Ahab and did evil in the eyes of the Lord, as the house of Ahab had done, for he was related by marriage to Ahab's family. Ahaziah went with Joram, son of Ahab, to war against Hazael, king of Aram, and Ramoth Gilead. The Arameans wounded Joram, so King Joram returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds the Arameans had inflicted on him at Ramoth in his battle with Hazael, king of Aram. Then Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of Judah, went down to Jezreel to see Joram, son of Ahab, because he had been wounded.
Sorry about all those crazy names. So I was just thinking, I'm sure many of you have read Moby Dick, and the main character is Ahab. And any thoughts about why he was named Ahab? I mean, there must be a reason, right? I mean, I don't think it's by coincidence that Melville named him Ahab. And I don't have the answer. I'm just wondering if anybody has any thoughts. I mean, Ahab, yeah, go ahead, Christine.
He's Ahab, the captain, had been warned basically by having his leg taken off by this whale to leave him alone. And like this Ahab, the king, he keeps attacking and attacking and attacking. And he's going to die. He's going to be tripped up by his own ambition to kill his enemy. And that instead of learning from the prophecies and et cetera, that he's just relentless and he'll be tripped up by himself.
Good.
That's what.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I think the whale represents the forces of nature, or I suppose if you wanted to look at it more from a religious point of view, God on some level, like Job.
Yeah.
Fighting, I'm going to win. No way. I don't know, just something to think about.
Yeah.
Unless anybody has any thoughts about it.
Also, Ahab is the ship is an emblem of capitalism. It's a factory basically, and no, it is from processing killing the whales, processing them, blah blah blah, taking them to market, and Ahab is a captain of industry, right? And so he's like the epitome of he's getting rich from this. He's clearly not interested in the welfare of his crew and the people around him, and he just has this will to control destiny, to control nature, and and like most children, I've rooted for the whale, but
Right. Well, also it's interesting. The narrator's name is Ishmael, right? Who's Ishmael in the Bible?
Yes, call me Ishmael. Ishmael is the son that was sent out to the desert. with his
Badly
mom.
treated son, yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah, but actually Ahab is, as you said, kind of raw ambition on a certain level, right?
yeah.
And it makes me think of some people we know in modern politics. Okay, so we'll go on now. The next chapter is the one that is, it's pretty upsetting. So let me give you a trigger warning. It's pretty brutal. So I'm warning you that it's brutal, and if you want to look away, I understand.
Can
All
I,
right.
can I interrupt for
Of
1
course.
second? I'm sorry, everybody,
Go ahead.
but I really have to go. I have an appointment at 11:30.
Okay, well, we'll miss you, but thank you for your
Okay,
contribution.
sorry, everyone. I wish I could
Okay.
stay.
All right.
Bye, Christine.
All right, who would like to read the bloody chapter 9?
I can if you were
Thank you, Jason. All right.
needing some brave volunteers.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. The prophet Elisha summoned a man from the prophet Elisha summoned a man from the company of the prophets and said to him, "Tuck your cloak into your belt, take this flask of olive oil with you, and go to Ramoth Gilead. When you get there, look for Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi. Go to him, get him away from his companions, and take him into an inner room. Then take the flask and pour the oil on his head and declare, 'This is what the Lord says, I anoint you king over Israel.' Then open the door and run. Don't delay." So the young
Yeah, let me just say that this is where Elisha is getting more involved in political machinations than, other prophets. Because it's not like God says, all right, I'm designating this guy as the next king, go anoint him. He's just doing it on his own. Now, maybe he's gotten a prophecy, but we haven't been told. So he's
tell him to say, "This is what the Lord says." So if he
Yes.
was saying that and he didn't get it, then that would be, bad behavior for a prophet, supposedly
that is very true.
being guided by God in all these other ways. So you would
Right.
hope that he would not be, what would that be? Is that taking the Lord's name in vain, or what would you call that? It would, misquoting.
Right. Well,
would not
okay,
be a good idea if you were a prophet who had all these things that you'd previously done come to
Right.
pass, right?
Well, I'll read you what Alter says. All along, prophets have been involved in power struggles around the throne, but Elisha's initiative in this instance is the most blatant of these involvements. He sends one of his people to anoint Jehu as king and to prompt Jehu to assassinate the reigning king. I mean, he's going to give instructions to him beyond what, normally is done. I mean, Samuel went and anointed Saul, but, he didn't tell him, go do this or that. Anyway, just a little tiny note. All right.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I think what we talked about several weeks back was about how the stories that we're reading here are separate from these other histories that they keep referring to, because these are the episodes in which they have seen God's hand in the works. So,
True.
Maybe we can say on some level that it's intended for us to think that God was doing these machinations in some way, as opposed to the people who were just acting it out. I don't know. That's
Right.
just a thought. Anyway.
Okay.
So the young prophet went to Ramoth Gilead. When he arrived, he found the army officers sitting together. "I have a message for you, commander," he said. "For which of us?" asked Jehu. "For you, commander," he replied. Jehu got up and went into the house. Then the prophet poured the oil on Jehu's head and declared, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over the Lord's people, Israel. You are to destroy the house of Ahab your master, and I will avenge the blood of my servants the prophets and the blood of all of the Lord's servants shed by Jezebel. The whole house of Ahab will perish. I will cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel, slave or free. I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, son of Ahijah. As for Jezebel, dogs will devour her on the plot of ground at Jezreel, and no one will bury her." Then he opened the door and ran.
Okay. So you see, once again, we have a servant of some kind. I mean, he's like a general or something who's going to take over from his master by killing him. Again, very Shakespearean here. And remember that Jezebel initiated a whole, well, she killed about 50 prophets of God, remember, way back? And so obviously God has to avenge these killed prophets, right? These murdered prophets, and wipe out the name of Ahab, except here he is, you know, over and over again, the main character of a bunch of chapters. Okay.
Well, there weren't that many books in print in Shakespeare's day, but the Bible was certainly one of them, right? So
Sure.
where would he have gotten a lot of inspiration?
Yeah, except from real life. Anyway.
Okay. When Jehu went out to his fellow officers, one of them asked him, "Is everything all right? Why did this maniac come to you?" "You know the man and the sort of things he says," Jehu replied. "That's not true," they said. "Tell us." Jehu said, "Here is what he told me. This is what the Lord says, I anoint you king over Israel." They quickly took their cloaks and spread them under him on the bare steps. Then they blew the trumpet and shouted, "Jehu is king."
So what they're doing here is they're creating a kind of throne for him with their cloaks. I just want to see how, yeah, so they didn't blow a trumpet, they blew a shofar, basically, okay, a ram's horn, because that's what that was used for, to announce a war or to declare that somebody's become the king or whatever. I don't know why they translate it as trumpet. Anyway, I guess to make it less Jewish. So yeah, so here this guy's about to become king, but he's got to accomplish the deed first.
So Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram and all Israel had been defending Ramoth Gilead against Hazael, king of Aram, but King Joram had returned to Jezreel to recover from the wounds the Arameans had inflicted on him in the battle with Hazael, king of Aram. Jehu said, "If you desire to make me king, don't let anyone slip out of the city to go and tell the news in Jezreel." Then he got into his chariot and rode to Jezreel because Joram was resting there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, had gone down to see him. When the lookout standing on the tower in Jezreel saw Jehu's troops approaching, he called out, "I see some troops coming." "Get a horseman," Joram ordered. "Send him to meet them and ask, 'Do you come in peace?'" The horseman rode off to meet Jehu and said, "This is what the king says. Do you come in peace?" "What do you have to do with peace?" Jehu replied. "Fall in behind me." The lookout reported, "The messenger has reached them, but he isn't coming back."
So what Jehu is saying here is, listen, you better join me, because otherwise you're going to be in deep trouble.
You didn't come for peaceful purposes. You came to know if I was warlike, right?
Right. They're always very suspicious. Of course, in this case, they're right to be suspicious.
So the king sent out a second horseman. When he came to them, he said, "This is what the king says. Do you come in peace?" Jehu replied, "What do you have to do with peace? Fall in behind me." The lookout reported, "He has reached them, but he isn't coming back either. The driving is like that of Jehu, son of Nimshi. He drives like a maniac."
So apparently Jehu was known as somebody who rode very, very quickly. And, you know, he apparently has wild energy. And we will see that this translates into his quickness as an assassin, because he's pretty ruthless, this guy. So, you know, driving like Jehu is an expression, you know, to drive like a madman.
Is that? I've never heard that.
No, you didn't live in those times.
I'm going to start using it, though, when I see crazy people on the road.
Are you driving like Jehu? Okay. No, don't do that. You'll get shot. Okay.
"Hitch up my chariot," Joram ordered. And when it was hitched up, Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, rode out, each in his own chariot, to meet Jehu. They met him at the plot of ground that had belonged to Naboth the Jezreelite. When Joram saw Jehu, he asked, "Have you come in peace, Jehu?" "How can there be peace?" Jehu replied, "as long as all the idolatry and witchcraft of your mother Jezebel abound."
All right. What's Naboth? What is that referring to? Anybody remember that story? It involves Ahab. Remember, Naboth had a vineyard that Ahab wanted,
Oh.
and he went to say, I'll buy it from you. And the guy says, "Forget it. I'm not selling it. It's part of my family's heritage." It's very similar to what's going on with Yellowstone. I'm hanging on to my ranch because it's my family's, you know, inheritance, even if it means losing money and everything. Anyway, so no, I'm not going to give you my land. This is the thing I inherited from my family. And remember, Ahab was kind of depressed about it. And Jezebel comes along, just like Mrs. Macbeth, and says, what is the matter with you? You're the king. You could take it over if you wanted it. Just grab it. So they engineer this thing where Naboth gets killed by, false accusations, and they take over the land. So, there's a reason that it's happening in this particular place, because this was the guilt of the family of Ahab to take over this land of this poor little guy. Okay, so now, and don't forget, Joram, who's the king, is actually kind of weak at this point because he's been wounded. And here he is being very courageous. He turned around and fled. Go ahead.
Okay. Joram turned about and fled, calling out to Ahaziah, treachery, Ahaziah. Then Jehu drew his bow and shot Joram between the shoulders.
In the back, right? In the back. Very, very, chivalrous.
Well, he did say treachery. The arrow pierced his heart, and he slumped down in his chariot. Jehu said to Bidkar, his chariot officer, pick him up and throw him on the field that belonged to Naboth the Jezreelite. Remember how you and I were riding together in chariots behind Ahab his father when the Lord spoke this prophecy against him. Yesterday I saw the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declares the Lord, and I will surely make you pay for it on this plot of ground, declares the Lord. Now then, pick him up and throw him on that plot in accordance with the word of the Lord. Then Ahaziah, king of Judah, saw what had happened. He fled up the road to Beth Hagan. Jehu chased him, shouting, kill him too. They wounded him in his chariot on the way up to Gur near Ibleam, but he escaped to Megiddo and died there. His servants took him by chariot to Jerusalem and buried him with his ancestors in his tomb in the city of David.
Now, Ahaziah hasn't really done anything. And so it's kind of ruthless of Jehu to kill him as well, but he sees him as a possible threat. And apparently Jehu was around when Ahab grabbed the vineyard for Naboth. So I guess he has some motivation to, be very, very angry at this guy. But he's also doing the word of the Lord, right? He was told to go kill this guy. All right, now we're going to see what happens to Jezebel.
And then we have in the 11th year of Joram, son of...
I'm sorry.
In the 11th year of Joram, son of Ahab, Ahaziah had become king of Judah. No, it's just that little.
Okay, thank you. And poor Jezebel, oh yeah, she did kill a bunch of prophets, but the main problem is that she was loyal to a different God. And that's the big crime in these books. Ready?
All right. Unless somebody else wants to do this, I'll keep going. Okay. When Jehu went to Jezreel, then Jehu went to Jezreel. When Jezebel heard about it, she put on eye makeup, arranged her hair, and looked out of a window. As Jehu entered the gate, she asked, have you come in peace, you Zimri, you murderer of your master? He looked up at the window and called out, who is on my side? Who? 2 or 3 eunuchs looked down at him. Throw her down, Jehu said. So they threw her down, and some of her blood spattered the wall and the horses as they trampled her underfoot. Jehu went in and ate and drank. Take care of that cursed woman, he said, and bury her, for she was a king's daughter. But when they went out to bury her, they found nothing except her skull, her feet, and her hands. They went back and told Jehu, who said, this is the word of the Lord that he spoke through his servant Elijah the Tishbite. On the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs will devour Jezebel's flesh. Jezebel's body will be like dung on the ground in the plot at Jezreel, so that no one will be able to say, this is Jezebel.
Very, very sad. Okay, so by the way, they bury, you bury the king. You don't let him just rot on the field, right? So they did bury this guy, and they were going to bury her too, because she is the, wife of a king and all of that. But unfortunately, there's not much left of her, which is what the prediction was way, way back, if you remember. And Zimri, the reason she says, well, first of all, she puts on makeup. And so is this because she's just trying to look good? Is she trying to seduce Jehu? We're not really sure why she's doing that. So what Alter says about that is that some interpreters take this as an expression of her desire to show a noble appearance. It looks more like an effort at the very end to exhibit her female attractiveness, thus picking up the sexual sense of the whoring of Jezebel. And Zimri, we met him way back in the first book of Kings, slaughtered the whole house of Baasha and usurped the throne, but was himself killed 7 days later. I don't know if you remember that story. But so she's comparing Jehu to Zimri, who's a murderer. And having her look out the window is, I don't know if you remember, but when King David came back to Jerusalem with the ark and he was dancing in the streets, Michal, whom he had abandoned, was looking out the window. There's also in the book of Judges, when Yael puts the tent peg and pierces it through the head of the Sisera, who's the general from the other side. And the mother, Sisera's mother, is waiting for Sisera to come back, and she's looking through the window also. So women a lot of times are kept inside, a home, and their ability to be part of the outside is through a window or from a tent opening. Remember, Sarah hears the, announcement about her having a child by listening through the tent opening. So this is yet another one of those images of, the woman kind of being stuck in a certain position, even though she was the queen. And so she is now gone and trampled by horses, which is just horrid. Okay. Thoughts, reactions to poor Jezebel? Did she deserve that? I don't know, maybe. She was pretty ruthless herself, actually, right? I mean, not only did she kill those prophets and go after Elijah, but on top of that, she also spurred Ahab to go ahead and take Naboth's land and to kill him and all that. So, but still, that's a pretty horrible way to end. Okay. All right, we have time to start the next chapter unless anyone has any thoughts. Who would like to? Oh, go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah, I just have a question, but I don't want to take us to another
That's okay.
Discussion, but I'm very curious on how, probably you already spoke about this, but how prophets later on in the Tanakh, that we only get to read what the prophets heard or saw in their visions, but we no longer hear in the narrative God's voice.
Right.
So I'm a little bit curious if you know a little bit of what could have happened historically that made the side from a narrative perspective on why that voice was sort of taken back, and like, I don't know, I find it very curious of how all these prophets just decided to
stop
speaking. They interpreting this voice. And unfortunately, I'm just starting to dive into prophets, right? That we're finally learning about prophets at HUC. And we were being told about the difference between classical prophets and non-classical prophets. And those who are like, they tend to have visions, they tend to live in smaller groups, they get commissioned by kings to look for answers, etc. So I'm just very curious, like how Elijah, I don't know, I think I have a lot of questions.
Okay, so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but here are a couple of things that I think about. First of all, we're in the section of historical prophets, and that started with Joshua, Judges, the 2 books of Samuel, the 2 books of Kings. These are historical prophets, and what we noted a few times ago was that the main transgression was not being loyal to Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, that they, over and over again, people strayed to Baal or to some other god and was not loyal to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, and that was the thing that the prophets railed against. Later, when we get to Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and the 12 minor prophets, they're minor only because their books are short. It's much more about ethical transgressions. So there's that move there. In terms of, I don't know if you were asking why prophecy stopped, supposedly after Ezra. Okay. So I can tell you from a literary and a psychological perspective. So God appears for the last time in the book of Job. After that, God is not in the story explicitly. Sometimes there's a reference, like in the book of Esther, well, maybe this is why you were put here. Or in Ruth, it just so happened that Ruth was in the vineyard of Boaz, in the fields of Boaz. Excuse me. But once that appearance of Job happens, that's it. No more appearance of God, no more God speaking to anybody. There's a wonderful book called God, a Biography by Jack Miles, which I highly recommend. And it's looking at the Bible from a literary perspective. And that God, eventually pulls back. And the idea is we have a direct relationship with God in the very beginning through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then through the prophets later on, which is one layer removed. And eventually, no God being explicit, it's sort of like parent and child. Eventually, you have to be out there on your own. You can't rely on God every time. And that's the maturation of human beings. So that is sort of the, literary and psychological perspective. I suppose religiously one could say the same thing, at some point, it's, we've been given all the tools and it's up to us to, live a life that's a decent life. Be curious to see who's teaching prophets?
She's a professor at USC. Her name is Hilary Liptka.
Okay.
Yeah.
Be curious to see what she has to say about it. Okay, so let's anybody else have a question?
I have a comment, Rabbi.
Okay.
I think that for Christians, Jesus is supposed to be the last prophet. And this becomes a modern problem with the Mormons because Brigham Young said that he was prophet. So the question is, does prophecy continue? And for Christians, this is a very hard question to answer. They tend to look upon Mormons as a cult, as opposed to being true Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Because after Jesus, there's no more prophecy. Jesus delivered the final prophecies. And that's why you don't hear about prophets anymore. Somebody might be an apostle. Someone can be like a philosopher or a teacher, such as Aquinas or Saint Bernard or Clairvaux, that kind of thing. But they would never call themselves prophets, ever.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. For us, it's Ezra is the last prophet. Although, God's voice doesn't appear in a whole chunk of the Bible, and then there's Ezra, who's a prophet. But
isn't God's voice horrible in Job? Isn't the last thing he said, I brought you into this world and I can take you out? I mean, pretty much.
Okay.
Voice in the whirlwind. Do you really want to hear? Do you really want to be a prophet after that?
To tell you the truth, we could talk about speech in the whirlwind for a long time. I think God does not come off very well in that speech. However, some people think it's a magnificent speech where God shows you all the incredible things that God does and whatever. And how can Job even question? But I don't agree with that interpretation. But Rebecca, you had something you wanted to?
Yeah. Do you think it also has to do with the destruction of the Second Temple? I don't know.
Oh, the end of prophecy. Yeah, well, the destruction of the second temple didn't happen until 70. So I think prophecy stopped supposedly before then.
Yeah, you're
But
right.
but you know
Earlier.
what?
Mhm.
This was edited later. So maybe that had an influence. I mean, people think that the Torah was written or was edited in Babylonia under Ezra. They think Ezra might have been the editor. Ezra's the last prophet. Yes, sometimes you like to put yourself in a good light. And then the rest of it was put together and canonized in the year 100, which was after the destruction of the temple. So maybe that had an influence on how, God's voice is understood. That's very possible. Of course, we don't know for sure because we weren't there. They didn't leave us a lot of notes, but that certainly might have had an influence. I don't know. Okay, so I guess we're going to stop because we only have like 3 minutes left, but great comments and great questions, some of which can't be answered very easily. Any final comments before we say goodbye? All right, well, thank you. Our next meeting is February 8th, I believe, or 11th. Let me just double check. I had just looked at it before to be able to tell you.
11th, I think.
Let's see, whatever that second Saturday is.
February 8th is a Wednesday.
Okay, then it's not on the 8th. It is on the 11th.
Right.
That's when it is, February 11th, 2 weeks. Okay, well, everyone have a great Shabbat and a good weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, everybody.
Rabbi.
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 Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Shalom.